We know how much you admired and appreciated Coach Robinson, and so I know how special of a day this is to break his record, and we just congratulate you. Please join me in this room in congratulating Coach Paterno.
That was just 2 weeks ago, and it seems like 20 years ago that happened. The last time the three of them will be in the same room together, Dr. Graham Spaniard, Tim Curley, and head football coach Joe Paterno. All right, so let's get to the game itself. Yes, there's a game to be played, and one of the missions of this show is to discuss the game, which is what we're about to do. So let's get to it. Offense versus the black shirt defense, all right? Let's get a tail of the tape between the two of those, Phil. It's always interesting to see the line them up between them. And the black shirts have actually given up a little bit more this year than people realize.
It's been surprising defensively, except for a couple of games. We had total yards, almost 350 yards, per game defensively they've allowed. That was not the expectation before the start of the season.
In fact, they give up a little bit in the air, too. Let's talk about the safeties for Nebraska and the problem they've had.
If Penn State is able to be successful throwing the ball against Nebraska, Steve, I believe it's going to be between the hash marks in the center of the field. That's where their weakness is. Cassidy made a nice interception against Northwestern, but game in and game out, that's been their weakness defensively.
We'll talk about Rex Burkhead a little bit later in the show, but Penn State, of course, has its ace, 1,000-yard rusher, 1,006 yards, and Silas Redd.
And I'm expecting a good game from him. And right now, Nebraska defensively, especially on their defensive line, has some injured problems. Crick is lost for the season. I'm not sure if Randall, the other defensive tackle, is going to be ready to go. Steinkuhler will probably take one of those spots along the defensive line, but Penn State likes to run the ball between the tackles with the zone blocking. They might be able to have some success doing that.
Let's take a look at what Silas Redd's done so far this season and his tail of the tape, basically. And the month of October, incredible. 5 straight 100-yard rushing games. A lot of carries in that span, but he's been able to be durable so far. We talk about the offensive line and Nebraska defensive line matchup. What's the line matchup you'll actually be zeroing in on, Phil?
Well, the center of the line. It's the center and the two guards. There's no question about that. That's what I'm going to be looking at. If they can have even up, because Nebraska probably won't have their 2 starters at defensive tackle, that's something I think with Redd that they can take advantage of. And the fact he's gotten to be a tougher runner in between the tackles is important.
Derek Moy will play in the game. He'll start and go all the way through in this one. The week off was valuable to him. Did no work with the offense during the off week. Has done nothing but work with the offense this week, so that's good news. Let's look at the matchup between the Penn State wideouts and that secondary.
I think Penn State's wideout receivers always create problems because with Derek Moy and Justin Brown, you have 2 individuals that always will create matchups with their size. The cornerbacks are good for Nebraska, but it'll be interesting. I think the key in this football game is going to be Justin Brown because he's the guy that can take advantage of the safety problem Nebraska has.
Alfonso Denner's been the guy that's really been coming on at corner for Bo Pelini in Nebraska. He talked about Derek Brown, about Justin Brown and Derek Moy. What about Davon Smith and where he can fit into the mix?
He's come on strong. I mean, he's finally learned how to become a football player. I always used to say Devon was a track player trying to learn how to play football. And since Derek Moy got hurt, he's performed much, much better and really seems to have gotten into the flow of the game. And with a guy with 10.35 100-meter speed, no one can really stay with him one-on-one.
And then there's one of the more interesting football decisions of the week. Tom Bradley is now the interim head coach. What happens at quarterback?
I would expect, Matt McGloin to start at the quarterback position. But you're right. That is a decision that was made by Joe Paterno solely alone. It will be interesting to see if Tom Bradley feels the same way.
Now, the way the coaching will line up for this game, we'll talk more about the defense later. There'll be co-defensive coordinators for Penn State, Larry Johnson, along with Ron Vanderlinden. But the offense stays the same with Jay Paterno and Galen Hall together making the decision on offense for Penn State.
Yeah, so there shouldn't be a lot of miscommunication. And listen, in a situation with Ron Vanderlinden, he was a former head coach.
Yes.
And they've worked with this system most of the time. throughout the entire football season. Tom Bradley will be on the sidelines like he was before. Larry Johnson, in those situations, and Vanderland will be upstairs. So I don't perceive much of a problem.
No, and no change at all in terms of how they're going to set up the offensive coaching for this game as well for the Lions. As for Nebraska, they had the great game against Michigan State, but then against Northwestern, things were completely different.
They weren't consistent. If you look at the Nebraska football team in the past, they had trouble with those types of offensive football teams, quarterbacks, even though they like to run the football from the quarterback position, and they spread the field. It'll be interesting to see how Penn State, which has played almost a traditional pro set, if Nebraska has a much more success against that style of offensive philosophy.
Well, we'll talk about a different style of offensive philosophy. You'll see it this week from Nebraska. Taylor Martinez at quarterback, Rex Burkhead the I-back against a Penn State defense that has played at a very high level all season long. The Nebraska offense against the Penn State defense right after this.